Me? Can somebody, I only see names, no pictures. Jill, can you hear me? Or Angela, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I have everyone else muted so that we don't hear any background noise, but you can go ahead. You're all set.
Okay, because a pop-up came up and said I was muted, so I just want to make sure. All right. So thank you guys. Thank you everybody for coming. We're going to talk about grief, loss, and change and other tales from the quarantine, because this whole year, I mean, thank God we're at the end of the year, right? I'm hoping 2021 is going to be better. This whole year has been such a different year for all of us based on what's going on. So we're going to talk about some of the grief and loss issues that come up because of that. So our goals, okay, here we go. Our objectives today. Oh, my mouse does not want to work well. We're going to talk about grief in general and then how grief has affected us because of this pandemic that we're in. We're going to talk about relentless self-care, which is so important. And I say relentless because we have to be intentional about it. We're going to talk about relevance, figuring out that new normal for all of us as clinicians, as an organization during this pandemic. We're going to look at survival guilt, which is a very real thing with the COVID plan, and then moving forward and how we stay relevant in this process. So that is our objective. We're going to jump right in. I usually start with a cartoon. This is just back from our cruise. Had a great time, and you can see that they have nice tans minus the mask there. So I can't see anybody's face, but hopefully you're chuckling. So what is the goals of grief care? What are we talking about with this whole thing? There's a couple things. My mouse is cold and slow. And, I apologize for the technical difficulties. The first thing is just to accept the reality of the loss. Can you hear me now, Angela?
Yes, you're good.
So there's something that keeps popping up on this computer that's muting me automatically. I don't know if that somebody else is doing that, but I apologize. We're going to keep going, though.
Yeah, that's fine.
If you just
The
don't hear me.
presentation isn't up. Share your
Okay.
screen. Okay. And then there'll be a pop-up that says, please unmute if you get muted again. I'm making sure that gets sent to you.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so goals of grief care. First one is accepting the reality of the loss and the change. And we're going to talk about change theory in a few minutes here, but the reality of loss seems like an easy thing to do. I lost my job. Somebody stole my car. I had a death in the family. I accept that. But I'm telling you, this first step of grief and change takes about a year and a half to really, really understand that somebody has died or that there's been this change. And I call it the head-heart connection. What your head knows to be true intellectually is sometimes very different than what your heart chooses not to believe. So that argument back and forth between your head and your heart is how grief works itself out. Okay, so in my head intellectually, I know I lost my job because of COVID, but man, in my heart, I'm really hoping I get called back to work. I'm just going to believe that I'm going to get called back for work. So that argument back and forth until there's a resolution is grief. If somebody dies, I know my husband died, I saw a body in a casket, but man, I just don't want to believe that I'm not going to ever see him again, so I'm just going to pretend that he's away on a business trip, and I'll see him at the end of the week. So that, again, that argument between your head and your heart is how grief works itself out for all of us. In the end, your head has to work because you can't bring somebody back from the dead, so your head has to win. So grief is the process of your heart coming into alignment with what your head knows to be true. So once we get through that process and embrace that change, the next kind of step is to figure out what the new normal is for us. So if normal before was I was working full-time at university hospitals, and now normal is I'm working from home, or normal before was my kids were in school, and now the normal is that they're at home and I'm schooling them from home, or that I was a caregiver to my mom with Alzheimer's for 5 years and my mom died. And so figuring out who am I now after the change, that's the next step. And really, I think the goal for all of us here is just survival, especially in this really difficult season of the pandemic. Like, we just got to survive. We're working towards a vaccine. We're working towards opening businesses. We're working towards all that. How do we survive till all that happens? That is the goal, okay?
Julia, when you get a chance, could you reshare your screen so we could see the PowerPoint?
Oh, you can't see it?
No, thank you.
Okay, I don't see where the toolbar is. Okay. Okay, here we are. So, share screen. Oh, where's my PowerPoint? Inbox. Hey, Angela, where is my PowerPoint? It's pulled up.
You might have to just click share screen on the Zoom.
That's what I'm doing, but it gives me all the options. I could pull my email, but I don't see the.
Oh no, just push like the first image on the option and then hit share. That'll show your desktop as it currently is. Yes, and then just minimize your Zoom and your PowerPoint should be behind it.
There's my email. All right, if I pull up the PowerPoint this way. Okay, can you see that?
Yes, perfect. Yep.
Can you still see it?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
You are welcome. All right. Talk about that. All right, so there's 4 types of losses that we all experience in life in general through this pandemic. First type of loss is a developmental loss. If you've ever tried to wean a 2-year-old from a pacifier, you know what a developmental loss is, because are they happy about it? Clearly not. So developmental losses happen through our whole life, from the moment we're born to the moment we die. When you go through puberty and your body changes and your voice changes and there's identity issues. When you get older and you have to wear reading glasses or you have a stroke and you walk with a cane. So developmental losses happen throughout our lifetime. Material possessions are just that. You lose your car keys, somebody steals your car. Some aspect of self, those are hopes and dreams kind of things. So if you always dreamed of that big promotion and you didn't get it, at some point you have to grieve that as a loss. If you dreamed of getting into Harvard Law School and you didn't, that's a loss. If you got cut from your basketball team, your dream was to play in the NBA, that's a loss. So just some aspect of yourself. And then the last one is death. For the rest of this program, what we're really talking about is how COVID is affecting us, some aspects of self. If you are a frontline worker who has been working countless hours, tireless hours, serving people who are dying of COVID, if you have to be the one to hold their hand as they're dying because their families aren't allowed in, if you're seeing more death than normal, because normally in your unit there was 1 death, every 2 weeks, and now there's 5 deaths a day, you're seeing a lot more, that's what we're going to be talking about for the rest of the period of time here. So just some variables in grief real quickly. How our grief is different from each other. So we don't all do it the same way. There's not really any wrong ways to do grief, except for 2 that I can think of. If you're thinking of hurting yourself, obviously that's the wrong way to cope. If you tell me you're drinking a 5th of Jack Daniels every night, that's a wrong way to get through grief. But other than that, there's not one right way. And so what we talk about is how our grief is different from each other. The first one is the nature of the loss. The example I always give is if I went to the doctor and they said, Julia, you've got a bad heart, you should never exercise again, I would say, thank God. I hate to exercise, right? But if you're an avid marathon runner, that would be a devastating loss for you. It's the same loss, it's just what does that mean to you? Coping skills, you can cope with anything if you've got good coping skills. If you have poor coping skills, it makes it harder. If you're an internal, external processor, if you're somebody who gets your tanks filled just kind of being by yourself and reading, or, maybe the pandemic wasn't that bad for you, but if you were an extrovert, you love being with people and you're forced now to process differently, that makes a difference. Culture, if a loss was sudden versus expected, people debate this all the time. Who has it worse? My husband died suddenly. because they either had dropped dead of a heart attack or they were murdered. I didn't have a chance to say goodbye. Her husband was in hospice. She got a chance to say goodbye. Who has it worse, Julia? And I say the answer to that question is they both suck. Death is just hard. At the end of the day, it's hard, whether you expected a death to happen because somebody was ill or it was sudden. But I would say the issues are different. And so that's what we look at in grief. They're both hard. I would never tell somebody, well, at least your loved one died this way, so this isn't as hard. It's all hard. But there are issues that are different. If you know somebody's going to die because they're in hospice, you have the opportunity to say goodbye ahead of time. You say, Dad, we're going to miss you, but we're going to take good care of Mom. So whenever you're ready to let go, you let go. You can say, I'm sorry, I was a jerk in high school. You can say, where'd you hide the money in the Cayman Islands? Like, you can ask a lot of things if you have the opportunity to. But I would say just because you have the opportunity to doesn't mean you're going to. A lot of people die, their families believing that there's going to be a cure, that God's going to heal them, that somehow they're going to escape death. And when it happens, it's like a shock to them. A couple more. Anticipatory grief is grieving ahead of time, being able to say goodbye. If you have been caring for your mom with Alzheimer's or your dad for years and you've fed them and bathed them and taken care of them, you've done a little bit of that grief work every day. So when they actually die, it's still incredibly sad. It's almost a relief because they weren't themselves. There wasn't maybe quality of life. And you've done a lot of the grief work ahead of time. And people say to me, well, Mrs. Smith didn't look real sad. Her mom died. And I'll say, you don't know Mrs. Smith hasn't grieved a little bit every day for the last 5 years. So again, when the death happens, it really is sometimes a relief. Concurrent stresses, if you are planning a wedding, that's a happy thing, but it's a stressful thing. So if you have other things going on in your life while you're grieving, as we all do, that complicates things. A perceived support system. If you believe you have a good support system, you can get through anything in life better than if you feel like you're all alone. And then the last one here is disenfranchised grief. And that's a big old word that means grief we can't talk about because it's socially negated, all right? And so an example of that would be abortion. People say, well, you picked that, so why are you sad? It's an incredibly difficult grief to process with people. If I'm having an affair with a married man, and he dies, am I welcome at the funeral? Probably not, because nobody knows me, right? Now, I always clarify, because the one time I did this in a workshop, and somebody wrote on an evaluation, you shouldn't have affairs with married men. So just to clarify, this is an example. I'm not having an affair with anybody. The other example I like to give is Ariel Castro's mom. We all know that he was a horrible individual. But at the end of the day, there's a mom who lost a child, and there's a legitimate grief in that. Where does she go in Cleveland with her last name is Castro to get unbiased support? I think that's a disenfranchisement right there. Okay, so does it get better? Does grief get better? Is this COVID thing going to get better? Here's what people like. People ask me all the time, does it get better? And I say no, because I'm all about telling the truth. It doesn't get better, it gets different. Because for most people, getting better means I go back to the way I was. And if you've had a significant loss, you can't go back to the way it was without that person in your life. After COVID, do I hope that we're going to be having all the restaurants open? Yes. And are we going to be not wearing, I'm so sick of wearing a mask. I hope all those things, but we're never going back to normal. We're never going back to a pre-COVID state because we've experienced COVID. And the next pandemic had come, and the next one. And now we're going to be cautious. So it never goes back to normal. So does it get better? No, it gets different. So here's a diagram that I think depicts what people want to see happen. If I'm the gray container and my grief is the black dot, that's what I want to see happen. I want to see over a period of time, the grief gets smaller and smaller. I don't think that's what happens. I think this is what happens. I think the grief stays the same because it changes us permanently. I think our capacity to hold it gets bigger. So that's what gets enlarged. That's what makes it feel like the grief is going away, but I think it's actually just our capacity is what changes. So there's not one right way to grieve. We talked about that. There's lots of ways of looking at this. So I'm going to date myself here and ask if any of you if you remember the Aesop's fable of the 7 blind men and the elephant. And I'll assume, because I'm old, I know it, that most of you are probably young and you don't remember, so I'll tell you just real quickly, paraphrase. There's a man who had an elephant, and 7 blind men came by. And he asked the blind man, can you describe what an elephant is to me? And so the blind man that touched the side of the elephant said, ooh, an elephant's like a brick wall. It's really strong and sturdy. And the one who touched the legs said, ooh, an elephant's like a tree trunk. It's just, it's sturdy. And the one that touched the ear said, ooh, an elephant's like a fan. It's breezy. And the one that touched the spear said, or the tusk said, ooh, it's like a spear, it's sharp and pointy, so you get the picture. They were all partially right, but none of them had the full story, all right? I think grief and COVID are very similar to this. I think some people see grief as a tragedy, and it is for them. Their loved one was murdered or shot or took their life or killed by a drunk driver, and it's tragic, right? There are other people that view grief as liberation from pain. Your loved one's been in a lot of pain for years, and they've been in hospice. For you, maybe, for them, death is a liberation from pain. For some people, there's a very spiritual component. There's cultures that believe that, if I suffer now, in this life I will suffer less in the afterlife. So they don't want pain medicine because they want to suffer a little bit because of that bigger goal. There's some people that process grief as just coming to grips with a terrible process. Like, it sucks that this happens to me, but, this is what life is dealt, and they come to grips with it that way. For some people, grief is suffering. For some people, grief is relief. I have a lot of families that lost their loved one to suicide that say, they had mental health issues. They had multiple attempts over the year. Every time the phone rings, they panic thinking, is this the call? It's this, they found my loved one. And so for them, they'll say it's just a relief that it's done now. And that sounds horrible, but it's a very real feeling for them. Like they were sitting on the edge of their chair for years waiting for this phone call. And when it comes, again, it's incredibly sad, but there's a sense of relief. I think COVID is the same way. We all experienced COVID differently, especially the quarantine when it first happened back in March. So I personally experienced it as an inconvenience. I got to work from home. I didn't lose my salary. I don't have any young kids in the home that I had to take care of. My daughter graduated from college, and there was no commencement. That's probably the biggest inconvenience, and that really wasn't an inconvenience. It was just sad that we didn't get to have a commencement. But it was inconvenient. I couldn't go to the restaurant. I couldn't go get my nails done. Couldn't go get my hair done. I experienced COVID, that pandemic, that first phase of it, as an inconvenience. For some people, this was devastating. If you were a restaurant worker and all of a sudden you're unemployed, and you don't have any money to pay your bills or buy your medication, it's devastating for you. If you are a frontline worker, again, and working at a hospital, and you're working long hours with lots and lots of COVID patients, it's devastating, right? For some people, this is a crisis. Crisis of faith, a crisis of the mental health system, a crisis of the government. How do we not see this coming? Like they're experiencing COVID that way. For some people, this is a very traumatic thing. They are experiencing this as, is the world coming to an end? Is there a conspiracy theory? What's happening? Some people, they're like, this is increased family time. I get to see my family, my kids, my spouse, my partner, more during the day. This is great. We're hunkering down during the quarantine, and we're loving it. That's how they experience it. Some people experience this as fear. Like, is it going to get me? What's going to happen? Is another pandemic coming? And some people, this is their worst nightmare. This is their worst nightmare come true. And so, again, none of these are right or wrong. They're just different. So we just need to be mindful when we're working with our clients or patients that we don't all experience grief the same way, and we're not all experiencing this COVID-19 pandemic the same way. So a little bit about COVID-19, little is known about the pandemic's impact on mental health. What we're seeing now is that there's going to be this second wave of physical disease that's happening right now. We're starting to see the surge in the Cleveland area. But there's a second wave coming that the researchers have said is going to have to do with mental health, about social isolation. We've already seen the suicide rate in Cuyahoga County increase since the start of this COVID process. We're seeing more depression. We are, if you are with a spouse that batters you or a partner that batters you, and you couldn't escape by going to work during the day, you're stuck with this person during a quarantine. We're seeing increased rates of abuse and things like that. If you were a marginalized child going to school and you were getting 2 meals at school, your breakfast and your lunch, and now you're being homeschooled, you are, maybe there's a food shortage, maybe you're not getting the meals that you're used to getting. So there's this mental health component that's coming that we're trying to kind of all prepare for that we don't fully understand just yet. Psychological stress is not limited by geography. If you were in New Orleans during Hurricane Katrina, you were devastated by that kind of loss. For the rest of the world, it was a sad thing. It was incredibly difficult. but I wasn't personally affected because I live in Cleveland. I don't live in New Orleans. And so COVID hits globally. It's not affected like a hurricane or the wildfires in California where thousands of homes are being destroyed. That affects somebody, it doesn't affect everybody around the globe. This is a global pandemic. And Case did a study and found that 94% of the people that they interviewed described symptoms of grief along with COVID. And again, I think that's a significant thing. And again, we've talked a little bit about introverts and extroverts and how they're processing this differently. The introverts, they're loving it, being home alone, but the extroverts may be having a hard time. And then again, we talked about domestic violence and hungry kids. That's how COVID is changing or affecting us. So what are we grieving for during this pandemic? We're grieving for life as we knew it, right? We used to be able just to go. How many times have you gotten out of your car, gone into the Target, you walked from the back of the parking lot because it's Christmas time, you get to the door and you realize, oh, shoot, I left my mask in the car. You got to walk back to your car to get the mask. We're grieving just being able to quickly do things. When the stores first opened after the quarantine, you know, you couldn't get, there was lines outside of every store 6 feet apart, and it was cold, and you had to, because they can only have so many people in the store at the same time. So we're grieving for life as we knew it, for just that normal thing. For some people, they're grieving a job, they're grieving an income. For some people, they're grieving, you know, that fellowship, that being able to talk to other people. Working from home has its perks, and some businesses are now going to a stay-at-home to work policy, even though they don't need to, because they found their employees to be much more productive. I personally don't like it, because I like to look across the hall and say hey to somebody. I like to stand, you know, by the kitchen sink, you know, getting our coffee and talking for 3 minutes about how was your weekend. Like, that's the kind of thing that doesn't happen when everybody's working from home. And we're grieving for security, just not knowing, okay, is there another pandemic coming? Is the government going to take care of it? That kind of thing. So when stress rises, self-care tends to fall. That is a known fact. How many of you, and if I could see you, I would ask for a show of hands, do you like this? We're just on empty, right? And I would say your car only works if you have gas in the tank, right? And so you could have a beautiful BMW or a Maserati, leather interiors, all the bells and whistles, but if there's no gas in the tank, the car won't go, right? And so we are all created with a physical tank, an emotional tank, a cognitive tank, a spiritual tank. We're all created with those tanks, and if our tanks aren't full, we don't go, right? So you can have the best job in the world, the best education, the best family, the best of everything, but if you are so run down, which I know many of you are because of the COVID thing right now, if you're so run down that your system is on empty, you're not good for anybody. So self-care, and that's why I said it's relentless self-care. It's purposefully doing things when we are feeling overwhelmed and stressed to keep those tanks filled. So that may be something different for everybody. So for me, emotionally keeping my tank full, I just like to be by myself. I like to put on my robe and a cup of hot chocolate and a Hallmark movie, and that's how I fill my tank. Other people journal. Other people talk to a therapist. It doesn't matter what it is, but you know what it is to fill your tanks. The reality for the quarantine that many of us experienced, and I like this picture of this lady, she's like juggling 1,000 things. She is working from home now. She's watching a baby now that maybe was at daycare before. She's keeping the house clean and her kids fed and her spouse fed and working and is juggling a lot of things that employees before the quarantine reality would come to work and their focus could be on work. But now it's I'm working from home, but my kid's crying in the next room, and I got to check the homework and that kind of thing. We're juggling a lot. And again, last picture here, we would never let our cell phone battery get to looking like this, so why do we let ourselves? Well, sometimes I think we're more concerned about that phone battery, and I don't want to be disconnected. Sometimes we need to disconnect it just to refuel, okay? So how does working during a pandemic affect your life? Decision fatigue is a very, very real thing. Sometimes you're making decisions all day long in your position, whatever your role is at University Hospital. You're making decisions, big ones, the little ones. The big ones of, do we put somebody on a breathing machine, just the little ones. And when you get home, and you know, let me tell you again, I can't see you, but hopefully some of you experience it. You get home, you've had a long day, you've made decisions all day long, and you get through the door, and your spouse says, "What's for dinner?" And you're like, "Oh my gosh, I can't make one more decision." And I would say, I'll make whatever you want. Just tell me what to make. oh, whatever you want. No, I don't want to make one more decision. Or you get in the car to go to, where do you want to go? What restaurant? I don't care. I'll eat anywhere. No, where do you want to go? Like that fatigue of we made decisions all day long that we literally can't make them when we get home. That's a very real phenomenon. Find your tribe. That's how you're going to survive this. Your tribe may not be your family. Your tribe may be people that you work with. Find somebody who understands what you do, who understands the realities right now of COVID and what you do in your role at the hospital. I always say, when I graduated, I have a degree in social work. My dad, who's a PhD engineer, professor, said to me, they're going to pay you just to talk to people, Julia. And I said, well, I'm not just talking to people, it's counseling. Like, it's a real thing, field. So they're paying you just to talk to people. Like, he couldn't wrap his mind around it. So much as I adore him, he's not my go-to person if I'm stressed or struggling at work or I have a hard client, because he doesn't get what I do. So find people, find your tribe who know what you do, who can support you. Work-life balance, I think, is a misnomer. I think balance, we think of 50-50. And again, I don't think that's what happens. I think that when we're at work, aside from an emergency or occasionally your kid getting sick at school, you should be 100% at work. But that means that when you're at home, you're also at 100%. That means when you're at home, you're not thinking about, oh, did I forget to chart this? Or I wonder if somebody remembered that. When you're at home, you're all in. So we should be all in wherever we're at. So to me, it's 100, not 50-50. Media consumption, like this is my biggest stress management tip I can give you, is quit watching the news, especially now. We have seen the increase in depression, in suicide, in bullying, and a lot of things since the invention of the smartphone 10 years ago. Because before that, if you were as old as I am, you remember, after dinner, you go to your computer and you would hit the dial-up and you would try to ring into the internet and you could hear it ringing like you could actually hear the phone ring. And if you got connected, it's like, oh, yeah, I got connected. And you'd spend an hour on Facebook or, or doing whatever. And that was it. But now we have our phones on our hip 24/7. They're always on. I can't even get my kids to turn them off when they go to bed. Turn them off. Who cares if somebody calls you at 2 a.m.? You need to sleep. But we don't. We're so connected in, but that means we're bombarded by information, by videos, by bullying, by all kinds of things. And so just media consumption is really, really important to take a look at because it does affect our mental health. And then watch your addictions. We all have them. We may not be addicted to a substance, but we could be addicted to being right. We could be addicted to watching our smartphone. We could be addicted to work and working, way more than we need to. So mind your addictions. You ever feel like your body's check engine lights on and you're like, this will be okay? That's me. I see these little symbols. I don't know what they mean. I think, maybe if I turn on the car next time, it will go away. But we need to pay attention to what our bodies are telling us, right? With dashboard in your car, it tells you what's working and what's not, right? It tells you how fast you're going, tells you if you need gas, if you're about to run out. If we had a gauge of our dashboard of our life, we'd be able to know, what is our love gauge? Are we feeling loved or are we not? What's our energy gauge? How much energy do we have? How much stress do we have? So, when I do this in person, we'd like to fill this out. Like, just take a look at, evaluate where your body's at. That's how you begin to deal with stress. Some things that aren't helpful when we're trying to manage the stress of this COVID. This comic, she says, well, maybe if you rest one arm at a time. Like, he's pushing a boulder uphill, and he's exhausted. And again, how many of you feel like that? And so for your friends who just say something stupid like, maybe you should rest one arm at a time, or why don't you just call in sick? They don't get it. So those things are not helpful. I call them cliches. Cliches are things like, God can give you more than you can handle, or if you've had if you had a miscarriage, well, you're young, you could get pregnant again, or if you lost your grandparent, well, they lived a good long life, or they're not in pain anymore. So cliches are statements that may factually be true. Yes, you're young, you can get pregnant again. Yes, your loved one, lived a good long life. But when we're hurting, we don't want people to appeal to our intellect. We want them to appeal to our heart. We just need to say, I'm so sorry. Isn't that what you want to hear from your neighbors who know you're working on the front lines? I'm so sorry that you're having to struggle through this, but thank you for what you're doing. You don't want to hear, well, if people would wear their masks, they wouldn't be coming into the hospital. You wouldn't be like, no, just I'm so sorry. That's all you have to say. Things that are helpful for you dealing with stress. Is finding a support team. Again, your tribe, we talked about that, people who get it. Physical activity, just taking a walk sometimes is all you need. Change your scenery for 10 minutes, and that usually helps. Positive coping skills, your EAP. You guys have an EAP department. Most large organizations do. That's free counseling. They're amazing programs, so utilize your EAP. Minimize other sources of stress. You can have a stressful job. You can have young kids and make you feel stressful when you get home. But you really need to be the head of the PTA as well. Like, find something that you can get rid of that's stressful. It can't be your job. It can't be your family. It has to be something different. But find, like, what do you really not need to be doing, and that's how you minimize stress. Healthy diet is good for you. Find some people who listen non-judgmentally. That's the key to this. And when all else fails, remember that stress, spelled backwards, is desserts, and you can never go wrong with desserts. All right? This lady says, you okay? What you looking at? This is during the quarantine. He's like, remember what it was like in the outside world? And thank goodness we're past having that, everybody having to be at home. Hopefully we're not going to go back there. I'm going to just skip through the slide because we're going to run out of time here quickly. But all the things that we deal with during this COVID crisis is on that slide. The bottom line is, we're tired. I'm tired of wearing a mask. I'm tired of spraying down. I work at a counseling center, and every time somebody leaves the office, we spray the whole room down. I'm tired of taking people's temperature when they walk through the door. But we do it because we have to. We want to stay safe. But we're tired of this. Like, I thought when this happened in March, oh, we'll get to June, life will be back to normal, we'll be done. Who would have thought that here we are at the end of the year still dealing with it? So we're all tired. This lady says, I just want a normal week. But the reality is we've got new normals now. There's not going to be any normal week, and so that's what we have to figure out how to do here. So Lewin's change theory, I don't know if there's any social workers on the call here, but change theory is very specific in how it works. So what happens is we got to unfreeze the behavior we're trying to change. We're going to introduce what that new behavior is, and then we're going to freeze it. We're going to hope it sticks. So you think about if you're potty training a child, that behavior before is they wore a diaper. We're going to unfreeze that and talk about, peeing on the big potty, and then we introduce that new behavior. We reward them with an M&M every time they do it or whatever, and then that new behavior sticks. Here's the challenge with COVID, is that we didn't see it coming. We couldn't prepare for the changes that were going to happen. So they were all thrust on us immediately, and I teach at CASE and in the social work school, and, one day we get this call, like, all the students are leaving campus, starting next week, you got a Zoom. I didn't know what Zoom was, right? So we weren't participants in the change theory. If we can do this the way Lewin says, it's much better, but we weren't able to do that. So Amazon, if you remember, Amazon, 20 years ago, how they started, they were a bookseller. That's how they started. They saw the handwriting on the wall. They adapted to the change, and now they're a bazillionaire company that you can buy everything from. They saw the need for change, and they changed. A couple of companies that didn't survive this, Kmart, they couldn't make the changes to stay relevant, and that's what we're going to talk about. How do we stay relevant in this field? And Sears is another one. They're pretty much they're done. They couldn't stay relevant. They couldn't accept the change. They couldn't make changes. So the challenge of this change theory is that we didn't know it was coming. We were totally unprepared for it, totally surprised. Even the students, that I work with, all of a sudden you're in class one day, you're in your fraternity, you're in your clubs at school, you're doing all this, and the next day you're back home in California, you're not on CASE campus anymore, and your classes, I taught an 8 o'clock class, it's like 5:30 when they're getting on the Zoom call in California. So we didn't know it was going to be here. We were totally unprepared for it. It was forced on us. We didn't have a choice in it. It isn't like, do you want to take classes in the morning or afternoon? The change was forced on us, and none of us like having things forced on us. It happened suddenly without warning. There was not this sense of, okay, probably in the next year, we're going to need to make these changes. It happened immediately, and we don't know if the changes are permanent. Every semester, okay, next semester, are we going to be back in the classroom? Next semester or next month, are we going to be allowing visitors to come into the hospital rooms? Are we going to be allowing this? We don't know how this is going to play itself out. All those points there, that's why this COVID thing is such a challenge for us. Getting to know people via Zoom is difficult. If you're working from home, a lot of hospices now are still working from home. Again, you don't get the information. You don't get to stand and talk to somebody at their cubicle and hear, oh, did you know so-and-so's daughter's pregnant, or all those kind of things. You don't get any of that, the other stuff that makes your job interesting. And in Zoom, it's not the same. It's just not the same. I accepted the fact that in March, all the students were mad. So the rest of the semester, it was just processing mad. It was processing I'm mad that we have to do this, that I can't be on campus. We process. But by summer, I do an intensive weekend class, and by summer, man, the students were all used to it. And I would say, Susie Q, it looks like you're at your pool. Oh, I have my apartment has Wi-Fi at the pool. Now, when you're sitting on class with your laptop in your bikini with a wine cooler, like that doesn't feel to me how learning is supposed to happen, right? So we quickly got used to it. But working from home, maybe it become a permanent if we're more productive. And so again, it's like if you do a good job working from home, then they reward you that you get to stay at home. You don't get to come into work. So there's some feelings around that. Is the quarantine making some positions or even organizations unnecessary or irrelevant? The first business or type of business that the news has said is becoming irrelevant are gyms. Right, so when the gyms close down, people bought the exercise bicycles and things, and they're just working out at home for an hour in the morning in front of their TV. Once you get used to doing that, do you really want to pay $100 a month to be a member of Bally's or a gym? Like, is there going to be a need for gyms anymore? My daughter works at the library. Library shut down. You can get anything you want information-wise on the internet. Our library is going to become irrelevant. Funeral homes. If you're used to having, funeral home industry has completely rocked by this pandemic because nobody's allowed to have a funeral. So they prepare the body and cremate it, but they're not having visitation from 2 to 4 and 7 to 9. They're not having funerals. They're starting to now a little bit with distancing, but for months they didn't. So if you got used to not paying $10,000 for a funeral, just doing a simple cremation and having your own kind of private service at home, is there going to be a need for funeral homes anymore? How do all these organizations stay relevant? Fortunately for you guys, hospitals, there's always going to be a need for hospitals, right? Possibly less communication with staff when you're working from home. There's just challenges with that, with information. So, where are we at with time? Okay, real quick. 11 things to remember with sudden life changes. The only thing that's consistent about life is change. Constant change is here to stay, as they say. You're not alone. Everyone goes through changes, and everyone, absolutely 100% of the people on the planet, are affected in some way by this COVID. Feeling confused or upset is normal. The haze you're in now will eventually lift. Initially, with any type of loss, there's this kind of numbness that you go through that does change over time. Do some self-reflection and look for the changes or your life lesson in this. Figure out how you're different because you had to go through it. What are you going to take away from this event? Focus on and appreciate what you do have left. You need to make a choice to keep going. For some people, they're just like, I'm ready to be done, but you got to keep going. Ask for help. Just because things are bad now doesn't mean they're going to stay bad. Eventually, things will get clearer to you, and then you need to mentally prepare for the next changes. At some point, constant change is here to stay. We figure out this COVID thing, but we then have to be anticipating what the next change is going to be. All my people just went away.
Julia, you are muted again and your presentation is gone.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect. We just need your presentation.
See, it's on my screen, so that's weird. I don't even know what's on. So where is, share screen. Where we are in that, so let's try that.
Perfect. We can see it now. Thank you.
Okay, I just want to see, yeah, that's nice. Okay. I'm not sure why that keeps doing that. I just get little pop-ups that say that. Okay, a new mask is available. Protects you from seeing, hearing, or speaking about what's really going on. Wouldn't it be nice if you could see it? There it is. That's the mask. So I feel like, oh my gosh, I just don't want to hear any more about COVID. I love that mask, so hopefully you're laughing. survivor guilt is normal. It's a natural extension of grief. So you probably all heard of survival guilt. If you're in a car accident with 4 other people and they all die and you survive, there's this sense of, why did I survive? Why was I the one that was chosen to live? And there's this guilt that can go along with it for many, many people who are grieving. It should have been me. If I'm 90 years old, I should have been the one to die. My 6-year-old grandchild should not have been the one to die in the car accident. So survival guilt is a very real thing. It also happens during a pandemic. Okay, so she says, it's sweet of you to worry about me, but no, I'm not going to be suffering from survival guilt if you're fired. And I love this one. What gets me most is the survival guilt, because he's still in the tank. He didn't make it onto the plate. Well, an employee is fired or let go from a job. It doesn't only affect the person leaving, but remaining employees within the organization as well. When this happens, many employees feel a type of survival guilt. In this case, it's known as layoff survival guilt, and coping with such can be very difficult. So if you had layoffs at your organization and you didn't get laid off, for some people, sometimes that can be a sense of, wow, you know, I've been here less time than the person I laid off. I wonder how they got laid off. And so there's a sense of guilt that goes along with it. Management perceives it a different way, though. So the myth in management is that employees who survive a layoff will be so grateful to just have a job, they'll be more productive, right? So if you had to lay off 10 people out of 100 in your organization, you're going to say those 90 people, they're going to be such a hard worker now because they're going to be so glad they survived this layoff. But the fact is different. The fact is that 74% of employees retained after a layoff say their productivity declined after it. It actually went down. And then 69% said the quality of their product or services deteriorated after a layoff, even though they weren't the ones being laid off. The sense of employee morale that happens after layoffs and things like this, I don't think employers factor that in. They just think, again, you should be so grateful that you have a job, you should work twice as hard for me. But the reality is that most employees just get this deflated sense of, okay, am I going to be next? What's going to happen? And they don't work as hard. Layoffs inevitably break trust in company culture, even during a crisis. Treating employees who are leaving fairly helps employees who stay overcome survival guilt. And so if you are laying off people, but you're giving them a severance package to get them through Christmas until they find a job, things like that make the survival guilt much, much less. Okay, so how employees can help? During every day, spending 6 hours a week interacting with your supervisor. So most of us spend an hour a week with our supervisor or clinical supervisor. What they're saying is that if you could spend 6 hours a week, so that's basically an hour a day, that decreases that number of employees that are not productive or not doing as good of a job. The reality is that how many of you could spend 6 hours a week with your employee? That's probably not realistic, but that is the one thing that research shows. Focus on controllable issues we may not be able to control, who got hired or who got fired, but what can we control? Eliminate wasteful meetings. I know that we've all been in meetings where we think, oh my gosh, you could have just sent an email with this update and we didn't need to meet. So eliminate that when you've got survival guilt going on. And then prioritize all activities in terms of what the customer values. So you can't still do 100% of the things that you did when you had 10 people on your team. If you laid off 5 and now you have 5 people on your team, you still can't do the work of 10 people. So what are you going to not do? What are you going to prioritize? And then lastly, we're going to have a plan here. And I love this little girl. So like when people ask me how my COVID plan's coming, I'm like, I have no idea what we're doing, right? Do you ever feel that way? I'm making you think I have a plan. Again, because COVID hit so quickly that none of us had a plan for this. So what's an action plan? An action plan is a plan that contains enough detail to achieve an objective or goal, which is how do we survive the pandemic? Preparing your organization for a post-pandemic world. Aside from the health and humanitarian crisis, again, we know there's this mental health crisis that's coming. How are we going to deal with that? That's a very strategic that every organization needs to be looking at. Evaluate, can you still shut down your operations and reopen right after the pandemic? What's it going to look like when you reopen? Can you make room, reclaim your lost ground? Are you going to become bankrupt? How are you going to survive this? That's what organizations, probably on a level much higher than yours or mine, need to be talking about. What is your plan for bouncing back? Like, what do you got to get through? How do you get through this? What do you need to do so that you don't lose customers or clients. And again, you guys are kind of exempt because you're always going to have customers, at the hospital. The lack of a plan only exacerbates the disorientation in an already confusing system. And we've seen that, I think, somewhat in the government. Like certain states are doing certain things, others are requiring masks, others are, policing things. We don't have a national plan, so it just makes things confusing. How will your culture and your identity change based on this? Are you going to become, like, one of the things that changed for us is that we do a lot of telehealth counseling now. We've never done that. We've always done in-person counseling, but people need counseling, and we couldn't leave our homes, so we're doing telehealth. So what are you doing differently? Future-proof your organization. What new projects do you need to launch, run, or coordinate? I think a lot of the businesses that shut down stayed current and relevant because they started making masks. Or when the car, I don't remember if it's Ford or which one of the companies, started making ventilators. So they are future-proofing their organization. They're staying relevant by doing what's needed in the moment. They're not saying, hey, we only build cars and that's all we're going to do, because they would have lost out big time. How prepared are you to execute your plans, making sure that you have a plan moving forward? We're getting towards the end here. Making plans with the team via Zoom, this is what it feels like. I have come to appreciate Zoom, even with all its challenges that I'm having today. But sometimes it feels like everybody's kind of doing their own little thing, but we're all on this big picture screen together, and that's not good. So even though everybody individually is doing good work on this picture, they're not interacting and working together, and that is a challenge with Zoom, I believe. I'm going to end with this picture, this image. It's kind of hard to see. There's a rain cloud, and it's raining on the person on the left. Kind of like the Ziggy cartoons where it's sunshine and rainbows everywhere, but over Ziggy there's a dark cloud. When it's raining on you, what does it do to you if somebody hands you an umbrella? It lessens the effects of the rain, right? The rain's not beating on my head, now it's beating on an umbrella. It lessens the effects of the rain. So many times I hear interns and employees and staff say, oh, I wish I could just take away their suffering, And you probably feel that way yourself when you've got really, really difficult patients in the hospital. I just want to take their suffering away, especially during COVID. But last I checked, I'm not God, you're not God. I don't have any ability to take anybody's suffering away. But what I can do is hand them an umbrella, right? Because if it's raining on you emotionally or spiritually or whatever that suffering is about, if I hand you an umbrella by giving you the tools that you need to survive what's going on, now I'm doing my job. Because I can't make it stop raining. But I can give you protection. I can give you the tools, again, to survive spiritually, emotionally, physically, whatever crisis you're going through. And if I don't have the tools to give you, I'm going to stand in the rain with you. Because that's what really it's all about. It's about connecting with people. So that's that cornerstone, and that is it. So I don't know if there's questions that you want to put in the chat thing, or I'm going to turn it back over to you, Angela.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, definitely type them in the chat. One thing is, Julia, if you could send me your presentation, I like to share it with the attendees so that they can look back on it. If they want to look back on it, they have that for them. I do have one question. Looks like we popped in here. If you can read it, I will be more than happy to read it for you if you want me to.
Oh, thank you for thinking of it, for assuming that I can, but I don't know where the chat is.
That's no problem. Sure, yeah. It says, it's good to hear on your slide that people may feel they are in a haze because sometimes I wonder, am I the only one? It's hard to imagine what the future will be like after this vaccine. So I guess it's not a question. It's more of just like a statement to your presentation.
And I wonder the same thing. And what I wonder is, and I keep asking when I go to the doctor, I ask them, are we going to need to carry vaccine cards? Because just like we have an eye donor card on the back of our license, in the Netherlands they carry do not euthanize me cards because the euthanasia is so huge over there. If you're a restaurant owner and you've been off and you've lost $1 bazillion, you're finally getting to open your restaurant, you don't want people coming in that haven't been vaccinated, right? So if everybody's not wearing a mask now, how do we know who's vaccinated, who's not been? Are we going to have to carry a card to prove I have been, so now I get to go into your establishment, I get to go in to the hospital and visit people? Because not everybody's going to get a vaccine, probably. There are people who, for religious reasons and other reasons, don't want to get one. People believe that this whole thing's a hoax. I still talk to people, and I think, how can you not think this is real? So, yeah, I think there's a lot we don't know yet. A lot we don't know about how this is gonna play out.
Very true.
Yeah.
Well, nothing else has came back through the chat. Again, if you have questions after this that you think of later on today, you feel free to email me and I can get them over to Julia. I did see that your contact information is in the presentation as well, so you could reach out to her directly after that. I will be sending out the emails very shortly after this presentation is ended. And again, if you didn't receive your evaluation, email me. And I will get that sent to you. Thank you so much, Julia, for your presentation.
Having me.
Everyone have a wonderful afternoon.